Okay, tonight we're going to do rooms for assignment K, rooms and room finish schedules. And first off, I just want to describe what a room is in Revit. Several years ago when Revit first came out, a room was just kind of something that was there. You place a tag in between walls and it would kind of find it. But now a room is actually a three-dimensional object. So if you try to place a room in an unenclosed space, it just comes up with this arbitrary little square and says it's not enclosed. If you place it inside of an area that's enclosed by walls, it fills to fit the space, but it understands that it has a width and a depth. It has an area and it has a height to it, and so it has technically a volume. And then there's a tag that has to go on it. So just like other things where you when we started putting doors in assignment 1, it was putting door tags in, not assignment 1, I'm talking about, it was assignment D. Doors and windows, remember how it wanted to put the door tag there. Well, a tag in a case like a door isn't that important because you can see the door. You could even click on the door and look at its properties and see that it's door number 101 if you wanted to. On the other hand, a room is not really something you see. It's kind of typically invisible, except that you can fish around and find it kind of hidden. You can turn on the display of rooms and then you'll just see these blue areas that are filled with a kind of an X. So when you place a room, you're centering that X, but Revit always assumes you want to tag the room when you place it. And I might have mentioned that when I was grumbling about the fact that I forget to turn off tag on placement indoors, but you always want to tag a room when you place it. Otherwise you have no kind of visible record that the room is there and what it's called and what number it is. So there's also going to be a situation where we're trying to place rooms in a space that's kind of divided up and there's more than one room inside one kind of set of enclosed walls. And so we'll learn how to kind of divide up that space without having to put a wall down the middle of it to separate it into more than one room within a given enclosed area. So let's go to our sheet A101, and if you didn't get that far, actually, no, let's go to our work L1 new view. Everybody should have a working view of level 1. And let's go ahead and change that view to hidden line so the colors don't get in our way. And then we'll go to the existing architectural view, and that's hidden line. So one thing about rooms that's different than other model elements is with a wall, let's select one of these walls. Remember, it has a phase created and a phase demolished. In the case of that wall, it's created in the existing phase, it does not get demolished. Whereas if I pick on this little wall that goes into the notch, its phase created is existing and its phase demolished is demo. Rooms, on the other hand, have one phase. They start and end in the same phase. So if I place an existing room and then I go to a new floor plan, there's no room there anymore. They basically just automatically kind of go away at the end of whatever phase they're created in. So what we're concerned about for our assignment K, if you look at the end of the handout, I've got the A101 and the D101 sheets with rooms in them. And then I've got the room schedule, and then I've already shown the door schedule, which is going to be extra credit. So if you want to attack that in assignment K, you're welcome to, but you don't have to. You can turn that in at the end of the semester for extra credit. So let's go ahead and start with the easier of the two, which is the new plan. And then I'll explain what's going on in the demolition plan. It's a little tricky on that. So let's go back to our work L1 new. And now that I've kind of flipped back and forth between views, I'm going to close all the hidden windows here with my little shortcut close hidden windows. So I'm down to just the L1 new plan. And before we go any further, let's go into VG and see what's turned on and what's not. Now, how many people think rooms are going to be under annotation? And how many people think they're going to be under model categories? How many votes for annotation? Okay. And some for model? How many for model? Okay, I kind of gave it away because I said unlike other model elements, rooms are kind of invisible. But the room tag is annotation. So if you look under annotation in your VG, there's a checkbox for room tags. And normally that'll already be checked. I just want to kind of point out, okay, they're turned on, so that when we place our rooms, we'll see the room tags. If you go back to model categories, rooms is an actual category. But like I said, you don't necessarily see that. So hit the plus sign to expand rooms, and you'll notice there's 3 subcategories under rooms. There's the color fill, which is this blue shading I mentioned, and all rooms look kind of bluish, and it just shows you that you've got rooms filling the various spaces. And then this interior fill, actually I lied, interior fill is the bluish. Color fill is something that we actually may have time to kind of show, but it's not part of the assignment. And that would be if you wanted to color code a plan and kind of shade in the different rooms. So if you wanted all the offices to be blue, all the circulation spaces to be yellow, you can color code and shade in the rooms, which is really cool. That's on by default, but it's not necessarily used until you go in and add a legend that applies the colors. The interior fill is that bluish. That's turned off normally. And then the reference is the big X that I mentioned that kind of runs through the middle of the room. It kind of shows you kind of its placement point. That's normally turned off. But rooms themselves need to be turned on so that when you place rooms in room tags, you see the room tag by virtue of the fact that the room is kind of turned on. If you turn off rooms, even though you can't see the difference, there's nothing to tag because the tag looks for a room, and if rooms are turned off, it doesn't find one. So it's kind of wandering in the dark, and it just kind of goes back into slumberland, if you want to call it that. So we can cancel out of that. Now the room, unlike my handout shows, if we go to page 1 of my handout, it says pull up the room and area tab of the design bar. Well, it should really say go to the home tab of the ribbon and look for the room and area panel. And that's where room, and there's 2 buttons, there's room and room separation line. And we're going to talk about the other part later. So first we just want to place rooms. So go ahead, let's see what we're kind of shooting for here. We're on A101. Now the thing about this handout that I really need to fix is I need to turn off the floor patterns because it's really hard to read. And I just haven't gotten around to that, to remake this handout. So I'd prefer in this assignment if you turn off the floor pattern. And if you don't remember how to do that, go into VG, Floors, and make sure under Pattern it says Hidden. And I also have a handout that kind of goes through that process. So it's turned off here, which is what I want. So now let's start by placing the living room, which is 101, I think. Is that right? 107. In fact, I'm going to back up. And on this plan right here, everything with the exception of the old kitchen and old breakfast are going to be the same in the new phase as they were the existing. So I'm just going to pull this over to the side, and I'm going to start with the entry room 101. Because it makes it easier if you know what your room numbers are going to be. Kind of like, remember when we put in column grids and we did 1 and then the next one was 2, then we did the third one we changed it to A, and then when we did the next one it says B. Room numbers are the same way. So let's go ahead and place a room. So click on the room button. Let's start with this entry space, 101. And so if I click in there, it calls it room by default, and it gives it number 1 because that's the first room that's been placed. So it's very literally saying, that's room number 1. So we want to change that from 1 to 101. Well, like doors, I think I talked a little bit about the fact that the doors actually have a number regardless of whether there's a door tag or not. See how it says door mark is 127? Well, it's the same with rooms. And what I mentioned about fishing around, see if you hover, you'll see that X kind of light up, and see how the crossing point of the X is right where that room tag got placed. So if you select that room and look in its properties over here, well, first of all, it tells you its upper limit. It starts at the first floor. You can't change that now that you placed it in the first floor plan. Upper limit is first floor plus 9 feet. Base is at 0. We're not really going to worry too much about room volume. HVAC engineers care more about room volume than architects do. And so Revit MEP, they create what are actually called spaces, which are very similar to rooms. But a space can also include like the plenum space above the ceiling, which we don't name as a room and we don't number it. So Revit MEP kind of uses this very similar concept, but it's more important for keeping track of volume for air volume for their design. So if we scroll down here, you'll see number is 1 and name is room. So if we change that from 1 to 101, Notice how when you apply that, it changes what displays in the room tag, because just like other tags in Revit, the tag is attached to, in this case, a room, and it pulls out the value that the room has as a property. So if I select this tag, nowhere in the tag properties does it say 101. It's pulling that from the room, but the tag itself has a font size that's saved into the family, and it has a series of options, of different types here. See how it says room tag with area? Let's turn off the area and just say room tag. And so it's just going to say the name of the room and the number. So then if we want to change the room name, we can again select that room and change its name from room to entry in caps. And then you can either apply or just move out here and it applies it. Now you'll notice in my handout that those room tags look a little more architectural because I use that architect's font. So to pull that up, and also notice how it underlines the name of the room. That's just kind of a convention I'm used to using. So in order to get those, we need to look in our families down in the browser. And if you look under annotation symbols, you'll see a family called room tag. And we don't want that one. We actually want one out of the Merrimack library that I put out there. So let's go to Insert Load Family. And thankfully, now that we have this shortcut to the Merrimack library, we'll use that. And then Annotations. And then there's Room Tag Architects. And hopefully, I fixed that so that doesn't have any glitches in it. We'll see. So I open that. It loads it. And so then on the browser, you'll see Room Tag Architects. And there's name plus number plus area, or name only. So now that I have a room and a room tag, I can select that tag. And just like you would change a door to a different door type, you can change that tag from the family and type called room tag to the family I made, Room Tag Architects, name plus number. And so now that room tag looks like what I have in the handout. So let's go with that. So again, I went to Insert Load Family. I went to the Merrimack shortcut. Make sure you go there and not to the out of the box, because out of the box just has the plain room tag that looks like Arial font. And then let's go ahead and place another room. Let's do the old dining room here. So we'll just go back to Home, go to Room, and now see how the type that's selected as we place the room. Normally, if you're placing a door, this is the family and type of door you're placing. But in the case of rooms, there are no different room types. A room is a room is a room. It's a family, and it's got one type. So then the type selector, unlike everything else, is showing you the tag, family, and type that will be attached to this room when you place it. So then I can go ahead and place that second room right here. Escape, escape. And so now it actually is going to place all further rooms using that tag we just loaded. So it's nice enough to do that for us. It remembers that we just loaded a room tag, so it says, I assume you want to use that tag. And so notice how this came in as 102 because we had just edited that to 101. Again, very similar to how levels and grids automatically kind of increment themselves. Now this time, instead of selecting the room, which is room number 102, and it's called room, you can have as many rooms as you want by the same name, but Revit's going to warn you if you have two rooms by the same number. It's going to squawk. It won't force you to cancel out of it. It'll allow it, but it'll be a little weird. Now, from now on, rather than selecting the room, which is kind of a pain, let's just click on the tag. And if you click on the name inside the tag and change it to Old Dining Room, it works. But did I fake out Revit? Did I just change the tag and not the room? Well, let's see. Let's go ahead and fish around and select the room and go down, and sure enough, its name is now Old Dining Room. So whether you select the room or the tag, you can change the room name or the room number. So it's really easier, since you're going to get a tag when you place the room, to go back and just click on the tag to edit that. It's fewer steps than having to fish around and then look over here to get to the room name. But I just wanted to demonstrate that even though the tag doesn't know the actual room, it kind of passes. It's like a translator that kind of pulls the room name and number and displays it for you. So you're not going to see the room names and numbers unless you've tagged them in a particular view. And keep in mind, we're working in our work level 1 new view. So if we want these tags to appear on the sheet, we can place all our rooms on this view, but then we'll need to go into the view that we put on sheet A101 and then tag everything there. And so you might think, oh, God, Hayden, you're going to make us go around and tag every single room again after you've placed them all? Well, that's much easier than you would think. So when we get to that point, I think you'll be very relieved that adding tags in another view is like a simple snap of the fingers. Question? Yeah, let me just pause and I will have you turn the recording back on. So Jonathan asked, how do you do that volume computation? Well, let's just real quickly, I have a section cut right through here. I'm going to pull that section a little further through my building. And let's go to that view. I need to pull it through like that. Okay, believe it or not, rooms actually show up in section. So if I fish around, yeah, there it is. It hasn't been tagged. So if I wanted to tag it in this view, I could go to annotate and say I want to tag by category, or I could go to home and go to tag, room tag right here. And I better be at a smaller scale than that, so I'm going to go down to 1/4 inch. And sure enough, there's my old dining room. And if you hover and select it, notice how the top of the room is taller than the actual ceiling. So if I select that ceiling, there should be a room bounding checkbox. There we go. And that room is actually too tall. If I select that tag and I say I want name, number, well, let's do room tag with volume here. And it says not computed. If I do area, it'll calculate it. It's always keeping track of area. In fact, if I select the room and look at its properties, it'll tell me its area is 260.25 square feet. Notice how that's grayed out. You can't physically say, oh, make it 300. You can move the walls, and as you move the walls, it's going to recalculate its area. So that's a great tool if you're trying to design spaces to a certain size. And you can just kind of think forward on how this could really be used a lot more for design than a lot of people are using it. A lot of people are just using it to kind of put a set of CDs together, and they're using SketchUp and they're using hand drawings for design. I don't think we'll ever get away from using hand drawings, but I think being able to manipulate things in Revit and look at them in the early phases there's a lot more potential. So let's change that to the one that says room tag with volume. And then how do you turn that on? Well, if you go to room and area, there's under the panel, that's one of those panels that has a little down arrow in room and area and volume computations. So where it says volumes, areas and volumes, you can compute them. The reason I normally turn it off is because you don't use them that much, but if you kept them on, even though you don't use them, it's going to slow down everything. So that's 2169 cubic feet. Now notice how the ceiling is cutting off the room. So even though the room says I go up to 9 feet, it only goes up to 9 feet unless it runs into a floor or a ceiling that's room bounding, which that one is. But Revit, again, doesn't bother to take that into account until I turn on volume calculation. So I could even delete that ceiling and notice that the room is still stopping at the floor because that floor's checkbox for room bounding is checked. I'm going to undo that here. But I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And when you delete a room tag, it warns you that you didn't delete the room, you just deleted the tag. And so it wants to make sure we know that you can turn around and place the tag using the room tag, or you can delete the room if you want to. Well, I don't want to delete the room, I just didn't need to see the tag in this section view. Now when we get into the final assignment, we're going to put together a sheet A301 that'll have a series of sections on it, and we will go back and tag the rooms in the sections, which to me is really helpful information. And if it were done in AutoCAD, you'd have to type it in, and then if somebody changed the room number, you'd have to go back to all those views and change it. Well, room 102 is always room 102, whether I'm looking at it in section or in plan or in large plan. So, again, the idea, the concept of a tag being something that's pulling information out of the one and only object, that's what distinguishes BIM from CAD, is that there's literally an object called a room, and that room knows what number and name it is. And so it will never be a conflicting piece of information about that room as long as you haven't kind of gone around the system and done something with just putting in pieces of text or something silly like that. So let's go on. I'm going to go ahead and change the scale of my view to an 8 scale now, just so it's a working view, so that doesn't hurt anything. And I want to place the old breakfast in here. Well, let me look at my A101, and that's actually going to be Hall 103 in the new part. Now, on this handout, another thing I need to take off of here, when you tag these, you don't need to tag the square footage in cubic feet and the comments in parentheses. I actually had a version of this tag that had comments, I think, but I think I've eliminated that. So again, this handout, I apologize for the fact that it needs to be updated. Okay, so in this room, we're concerned with what the room is called in the new phase. So that's going to be Hall 103. If you look at the demolition plan, it was called Old Breakfast 103. So I didn't change the room number. I just changed the name of the room, which I thought made sense. So we'll go back to Home and hit Room. And we'll... Now look what's happening. That room is spilling out past that little space that I meant to put it in. And if I change that to Hall, is that what it was? Yeah, Hall 103. So we got a problem here. Remember how we demolished a chunk of this wall? So Revit, being very literal like it is, says, look, you know what, you didn't enclose that. It's all one continuous space. So now, how am I going to put the other room tags in here, the rooms, and say that's the breakfast, that's the family room, and that's the new kitchen to the north? Well, let's go ahead and place rooms 104 and 105. 104 is that little hall. 105 is the powder room. And then we've got a closet. So 104 is this hall. That should work. This is a little bitty space here. And then 105 is the powder room, is it right? So we can go ahead and squeeze that in here. And we'll have to talk later about how you go about pulling a tag outside of the room, because that's not readable. But luckily Revit gives us an easy way to do that. And then it's the old kitchen. So then in the new phase, that 106 kind of goes away. And we'll have, where's 107? Living room over there. So I'll go ahead and place that next. Again, you do not have to place the rooms in numeric order when you're placing them. And if you're designing a building rather than documenting an existing building, chances are you won't know what your room numbers are. So just go ahead and place them and come back and renumber them later. So I'll go with room here, which is 106 is going to change to 107. We won't have a 106 in the new phase. And that's living room, I think is what it's called. Yeah. Or as my son said when he was little, the live room. I kind of like that. Okay. And then we've got, so the new stuff comes next. We've got breakfast, family room, and kitchen, 109, 10, and 11. But we've got a problem here, because when I try to place the breakfast room, let's go ahead and see what happens. Place a room right here, and I get an angry message from Revit. It's yelling at me. Multiple rooms are in the same enclosed region. The correct area and perimeter will be assigned to one room, and the others will display redundant room. You should separate the regions, delete the extra rooms, or move them into different regions. So it's throwing a lot of information at us, but basically what it's telling me makes sense, because we already found that this first room spilled out, so we're kind of placing another room into the same enclosed space. So what do we do to kind of chop that space up without having to put that wall back in that we demolished? Anybody notice anything that might be of help to us? Yeah. And where did you see that?
It's brought down under the roof.
Very good. You know what? You just earned the first party favor tonight. There you go. These are my little Revit roofs that have all the shortcuts on them. Eventually, by the end of the semester, I'll get enough of them made that everybody gets one. Okay, So we go underneath room and we look for a room separation line. So now we're going to draw this right on top of where that wall used to be. And it gets a little mad because my separation line overlaps with that little chunk of wall. That's not going to cause a problem. Revit, you're whining about nothing this time. So I'm going to escape out of there and close that message. The problem that I don't like with room separation lines, the way they come out of the box, and I left them that way so you'll have to fix this, is that you see that line there, and okay, I know it's a room separation line, so notice how the room now is contained. It's like you've created a fence to keep the animal at bay, but we don't want to see that line there because then we think, okay, is that a step? Is that a change in floor material? What is that black line? And so what I like to do is, you can turn off in VG your room separation lines. Let's do that right now. VG. Now here's a toughie. Where would you think, and let's see if somebody, John's disqualified because he's already gotten an answer. Who can find where we would go about turning off room separation lines now? They've got to be somewhere in VG because surely you got to be able to turn them off. Okay, and where are lines? Are they in annotation or in model? Okay. Lines. Okay, now where do I go? So how do I get there? So I hit the plus sign. Room separation lines. All right. Excellent job. We now have another winner. Ding, ding, ding. Okay. So we've got Michelle and John. So if you turn them off, uncheck room separation line here where Michelle pointed out, and say okay. Now you don't see it, but the room is still contained, so you don't have to see the room separation lines in order for them to work. So what I normally do is I like placing my rooms in a working view so that then if I forget to turn them off, it's no big deal. But what I really prefer to do, I'm going to undo that VG and turn them back on here. What I prefer to do is I change them from just a thin little wimpy black line to something that's just going to jump out at me to the point where I'm not going to forget to turn them off. And that is, how would we go about, well, I don't have any more prizes here, so we'll just go to Manage. And on the Manage tab, they kind of ran out of buttons, room for buttons, so they just put this additional setting, which is basically like a menu. And if you go down there, this is one of the few things in Revit that is called a style rather than a type in a family. And that's line styles. So if you go to Manage, Additional Settings, Line Styles, let's look at that list. And then there's our friend, or Michelle's friend, the room separation line style. So let's bump its thickness up, the line weight, from a 1 to about a 5. And then let's change its line pattern from solid to something really obvious like dash 1/16. And then let's change its color to something really obnoxious, like maybe a kind of a pinkish red. I don't want it to look like the magenta sketch lines. I want it to look a little different. So maybe kind of a dark reddish orange or something. So now when you hit OK, it's a little more obvious that that's a room separation line and it's something that needs to be turned off. It needs to be destroyed. So then I can go ahead and leave that turned on in my working view. And I can come in and start putting these other rooms in here. So now let's try again. You go to Home, you place Room, and you click in there. We've still got a problem because now the rest of that space is filling. So we're obviously going to need more room separation lines. I'm going to go ahead and name that as Breakfast 109. And now let's see what happens if I go ahead and run right through the screaming stoplight and put the kitchen 110, is it? Or 111. Let's put the family room 110 in there, even though they're not separated. So we're going to put lions and tigers in the same cage and see what happens. So I'm going to go to Room. I'm going to click in there. There's that angry message. It lights it up in the orange to kind of highlight it for me. I'm just going to say, okay, I'm going to deal with it in a minute. So then I can change that room to, was it den? Is that what I called it? Family room 110. And the number came in as 110. So now, let's just do a little test. If I change the breakfast room tag to name plus number plus area, it says, I gotta get this thing out of the way, it says 552 square feet. Well, that's spilling all the way out into all three rooms. What happens if we change the tag on the family room to name plus number plus area? Then it says redundant room. But the room is there, it just refuses to calculate that area to both rooms because it knows it's redundant. So the X for this room is there, the X for this room is there. So I was careful when I placed the two rooms to place them on the correct side of where I need the separation line. So I think this is kind of cool that you can do it after the fact. Come down to room separation line again. I better say when it tells me to. It'll finish in a second. So now I'm going to draw my separation line right down there. And no bells and whistles went off, but now if I go back and look, it says 174 for that one and 377 for that one. So now I could go ahead and do another room separation line. And I'm just going to draw it right, kind of maybe right through where the fan is and say kitchen is to the north and breakfast is to the south. Now it dropped the kitchen down to 151. So that kind of confirms that those separation lines are doing their job. And so now I could come back and place the kitchen as another room. And Revit this time doesn't get angry with me. I'm so glad because I hate making Revit mad. It gets so loud. So now I should be good. And then if I want to, I could go back to VG and turn off my room separation lines. Or I could use the shortcut, which is to select one of them and type VH. And that hides in view category. And so now I've got all my rooms for the A101 first floor plan. Well, I didn't get the closet here. Let's go ahead and pick that one up. Well, it doesn't even show, but it stays at 108. Do I have a 108 in the new? No. Good. So I'm going to make that closet 108. Even though you can't see it in the A101 sheet, you'll see it on the schedule, right? Let's see if we got 108 shown. No, I didn't do it in the handout. I goofed. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll go back to home room and I'll place it right in there. Escape, and I'm going to label it CLO period to try to abbreviate it, and that's 108. Now what happens if I name or number a room to duplicate? Let's say I accidentally did 109 for that closet. I get this somewhat angry message, but it's not screaming at the top of its lungs. It says elements have duplicate number values, but it doesn't say cancel, only I can close it and go right on. So that's a message that you have to pay a little more attention to, and you're okay with running through it if you know you're going to take the time to fix that later. So now let's see what happens. Lo and behold, all the time we've been creating rooms, there's been a room finish schedule kind of populating in the background here.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Before we move on, can you show how to move that tab from closet off to the side? Do you just drag it? Or?
I'll show you that in a minute. It's a good question. I'm going to go ahead and go to the schedule just to kind of pick this up first. Room finish schedule. And so these rooms are being entered, even though they're not sorting in order, and I'll come back and show you how to sort them later. But I just wanted to show, okay, 104 and 105 I haven't named yet. And what were those supposed to be? This is supposed to be hall, and that was supposed to be powder. So I'm going to tile the schedule next to the plan, WT to tile. And I just want to show that I could go to room 104 in the schedule and change its name to hall, and change 105 to powder. And sure enough, that will change it in the plan. So it doesn't matter if you select the room and go to its properties to change it, you select the tag and edit it in the tag, or go to the room schedule and change it. Duck is a duck is a duck. That room has the number and the name, and it will always be consistent. And the only oddities that can come up is if you've got that situation where you have the redundant room. And so we're going to add area to this schedule, and you'll see how, if it's redundant, the area is not going to fill in, because it says, no, I'm not going to give you two areas in the same part of the building. Okay, so let's go ahead and save what we've got. And then I'm going to go ahead and finish this recording and then turn it right back on. This is session 11, I think. Rooms. Rooms.